The Minnesota Vikings offensive line is super banged up, but how much of their struggles can we blame on that? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I'm coming to you from the UK from a hotel room on hotel Wi-Fi. So if there are any audio artifacts or if I cut in and out or anything like that, just know that's why. I'll be back at the homestead next week. Things will be back to normal, but for now, I, like the Vikings, am across the pond. Vikings are working out their logistics to get to London, and we have a lot of weird stuff going on that I can't quite talk about just because of what point in the week we're at. But later on Wednesday, later today, I guess, Kevin Stefanski is going to give some kind of clarity on who is starting at quarterback for Cleveland in the next game. That is very much under question, and I'm going to talk to Spencer from Locked On Browns about it on the crossover on Thursday. So for now, what I want to do is sort of post-mortem this Vikings-Steelers loss and the offensive kind of no-show that it was. I know they made it a little interesting at the end, but I don't think most of us are going to be like satisfied offensively. And the blame game is pretty easy. There's a backup quarterback. There's 3 backup offensive linemen. You could blame the jet lag. You could blame a whole bunch of different things. From some of those excuses go a little further than others, right? The jet lag or the field condition didn't seem to be something the Steelers struggled with at all. So it just brings up a different question, which is why was it only a problem for you? But what I want to talk about today is the impact of an O-line and how it changes stuff, as well as a look at O'Connell's play calling and if it changed in this game and how it did, how at least I think it did. Plus, a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. The Vikings do still have the number 1 defense in EPA per play. Of course, that's buoyed big time by like a couple of major turnovers, but the philosophy there is really good at generating production and really bad at feeling like it's generating production, and I want to talk about that. So, the cost of a bad O-line. The Vikings have Justin Skule at right tackle. They have Michael Juergens at center. They have Blake Brandel at left guard. It appears as though that same group will play against an absolutely horrifying Browns defensive line with Myles Garrett and Mason Graham on it. And those guys are looking like they're going to have a field day. And so the Vikings are going to have to do stuff to protect their O-line. So how do you protect your O-line when it's a bunch of guys, right? It's one thing, hey, you got one lineman, you can make sure he's in a double, you can chip, you can do stuff, but how do you protect a bad offensive line? That is, I think, the key strategic problem the Vikings face headed into this game, and the key strategic problem that they kind of failed to fix on the fly against the Steelers, which led to, and has led to all year, a horrible amount of sacks. But all of those sacks didn't come with everybody out, right? Maybe Christian Darrisaw was out and Justin Skule was responsible for a couple of them. But if you look through all of the sacks from those first 2 games before Darrisaw came back, you're going to find quite a bit that Justin Skule had nothing to do with. So it's like he can't explain away everything. So what happens when your O-line fails? If you don't trust those guys, right? If you don't trust Justin Skule, the easiest thing to do is get a tight end out there and chip him. This is what TJ Hawkinson has done. What you might notice, though, if you are looking at the tape or just looking at replays, because most of this happens on pretty short depths of target, is that TJ Hawkinson, when he chips. Like he will smoke a guy. It's probably really nice, and I think generally you like that more than you don't. Problem is he takes too long to do it. So I think for Hawkinson, if he could take a slightly less of a chip, and maybe that offers a little bit less help, but you still get out on your route, here's this like wrinkle of the Vikings offense that they haven't been able to iron out in all of these situations where Justin Skule is in and they need to protect him. And that's that the chipper is the outlet a lot of the times. and this is a universal McVay thing. You will find this in Green Bay, in Los Angeles, in Miami, in San Francisco, and any other team that's doing this. You will find that check release or chip release are parts of these play calls. So like if you're the outlet, you will often be tasked with this sort of optional chip. And you might go into a game knowing that the guy's the backup. You're going to take the chip every time, or you might say it kind of depends on who it is. You know, hey, if it's Myles Garrett, chip him. If it's TJ Watt, chip him. If it's not, we're going to let the tackle do his thing. And it kind of just depends on where the defense lines that guy up, right? You're not necessarily going to set the strength to the defense. In fact, the defense kind of gets to decide that, right? Because you line up and then the defense gets to come and match up whoever they want. So they could put Myles Garrett over Justin Skule every time, or they could put Myles Garrett on the weak side where he'll never get chipped, and then that kind of takes that away. But if you're in that check release and you are chipping like your TJ Hawkinson, you're also the outlet. And that means that against quick pressure, if you're chipping to protect Justin Skule, but somebody else loses quickly, like Blake Brandel losing on a stunt, this is what happened on that final big sack, by the way, on Carson Wentz, the one that got called for grounding, but I've kind of been calling it a sack because functionally that's what it was. Is that TJ Hawkinson chipped and needed to get out to be the outlet, but wasn't there to be the outlet because he was busy chipping. And the pressure came so quickly because Blake Brandel just took the cheese way too much on a stunt, turned his hips, guy comes in basically unblocked. And I think it was Nate Herbig, and it essentially is able to get to Carson Wentz like easy unblocked. So when you combine those things, fast pressure with a slow outlet, suddenly there's nowhere for the quarterback to go. I also want to mention in that one, and we'll get more into this later, but the Xavier Scott like breakout game thing that happened in the Pittsburgh game was really, really weird to me, and it did lead to some production, and I think we're all more or less happy with Scott himself, but I kind of think that they put way too much on his plate. I think that was a game plan designed for Aaron Jones, and with him not available, they probably could have left some of that off. On that last play, they were calling a play called wave, which is a really a go-to shot play. It's one of their basics, and it makes sense. They're running the basics with Carson Wentz. But it's essentially a post with like two deep crossers underneath it. So you should have three different people crossing the middle of the field at the same time, which will confuse just about anybody's defensive rules. It takes a while, but it was also 3rd and 14 or whatever. So it takes a while to happen. You also typically will use a lot of extra guys in protection. That's only 3 routes, and then you usually have 2 outlets who can stand in, chip, check release, maybe just be part of the protection. So that's kind of the point of the play. But one of those deep crossers was Xavier Scott. The other one was Justin Jefferson. And I think you had Jordan Addison was the one running the post. Why not have that be Naylor? That's what I don't understand. Why is it like I get Xavier Scott getting the touchdown on a scramble drill thing. He wasn't supposed to be the deep route there. He became the deep route because of the way scramble rules work. And I get Xavier Scott as let's get the screen, you know, let's get him on a wheel route. You'll throw downfield to your running back. Sometimes that happens. The amount that it happened made a little less sense to me. And in this case, either Xavier Scott or Justin Jefferson ran at the wrong depth and they ran into each other. And I think one of them was going to break open. So there was a place for Wentz to possibly go there if they run it right. There should have been an outlet, but the chip took too long and the pressure shouldn't have been there too fast. It's a failure on a whole bunch of different accounts. I am not, however, going to absolve Carson Wentz. I will absolve him of that play. I don't think there was much he could do. All he could do was try to get rid of it, and he didn't even manage to do that and got called for grounding. But there were a lot of moments. For example, the final play of offense of the game, outside of kneel downs, the final play of the game deciding 4th and 14, where the Vikings were trying to get to the middle of the field. And essentially they knew that the Steelers would play the sticks, right? Of course, it's 4th and 14, game on the line. A 13-yard tackle, 13-yard play is game over, right? So they can defend nothing short. And the Vikings knew this. So what that means is that your drop depths for your defensive like drop back depths are going to extend a lot. If you're a deep zone player, you're going to extend to 25, 30 yards. If you're a short zone player, usually like a hook, you're usually dropping to 5, somewhere between 5 and 7. But you can drop to the sticks, which means you're dropping 14. So there are no defenders in front of 14, which means every throwing lane is wide open. All you have to do is put one of those guys on the sticks in conflict. So they ran two really quick, skinny posts right at the middle, right at Patrick Queen. He had to pick away. He did pick away. For some reason, Carson Wentz didn't look at it. Carson Wentz his eyes were, at least it looks like to me, directly on Patrick Queen. Watched him go toward, I think it was Jordan Addison, who ended up with three different defenders around him, and away from Justin Jefferson, but didn't throw against that. To me, that is just like not being either experienced enough in the system, but like, man, a horizontal stretch on a middle linebacker is one of the most universal concepts in offense. A 10-year vet should be able to do that. And his incapability of doing that might explain why he's a backup, not a starter. But I got a little distracted there. The point is, when your O-line fails in multiple places, you can only give so much help. And to give that help, it is always costly. If you're going to chip with the tight end, that's not free. That means your outlet's that much slower. If you're going to slide the protection toward a certain player so that you make sure you get a double, another player on the other side of the field is going to be one-on-one. So with three different backups, you're going to have some trouble. This is what brings me to the general structure of O'Connell's offense and what I think they're going to have to do to move the ball at all on Cleveland. It's going to be a pretty tall order. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda sweats the details. They take a lot of pride in making sure that every single detail is felt, has its effect, and nothing is arbitrary. From footwork to timing out your breathing to all the timings of when you're going to break a route. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about in this episode. Athletes sweat all of those details, and Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel that Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like NFL players, Mazda sweats every single detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Moving on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. So here is the change that needs to happen. Yesterday's show, I did some, I answered a lot of questions about changing on, a lot of people just wanted to change who the coach is and fire a coach, replace a player, change the who. But I think you have to change some of the what, and there's nothing stopping somebody like O'Connell from making this decision. I'm trying to think about what Carson Wentz's strengths are. And I think Carson Wentz's strengths are, I think his throws over the middle of the field have been really, really nice. I think there is an aggression to him that is sort of immutable, and I think that's useful. It's not quite to the extreme of like Sam Darnold, where you could trust him to stay aggressive no matter what. Maybe sometimes even if you didn't want him to be, but you could kind of design an offense that took advantage of that. But with Carson Wentz, it's like, okay, he's not going to get scared and start checking down, right? And maybe even when you want him to. But you can sort of utilize that. So how do we push the ball downfield while simultaneously dealing with an O-line that, let's be honest, they ain't going to protect? There is going to be a lot of pressure in this game. If there is not, that is a ginormous win for Chris Cooper and his staff. But I am looking at this mismatch and not really seeing a way out that doesn't come with unbelievable costs. So one of our options is to pay that cost, is to say, okay, TJ Hawkinson, you're just not catching passes today. Congratulations, you are our sixth offensive lineman. We need you to be that today. That's what tight ends can be for sometimes, or maybe you want that to be Josh Oliver, but I think Hawkinson in pass pro is really, really nice. Also because he's enough of a receiving threat that the defense will still want to account for him and set their rules depending on what side he's on. And that's also really manipulable in a way that it's not going to be with like Josh Oliver, or if you had like Ben Urasek out there who's still hurt, I think. I should mention, well, we'll get to injury reports in a second, but like that's one option. Or you say, the running back is just never going to go out for a pass. Running back, you're just in. Vikings do have CJ Ham's window open for his return from IR. So that could be a possibility. It's just running back, you're just a blocker, especially on third downs. CJ Ham's in, he's a blocker, never going out for a pass. We're fine with that. Unless, there's no blitz. and everybody's picked up. But like we're just going to do 6 and 7 man protections, and then we're going to try to push the ball downfield with 2-3 man route concepts. This can work. I don't think it's sustainable for a whole season. I think, in fact, Clint Kubiak, when he was in Minnesota a long time ago, right? This was 4 years ago, and he's clearly grown quite a bit since then. But part of the reason he didn't work out in Minnesota is because the 2021 O-line was rough. And I mean, we had like lots of Dakota Dozier snaps, right? So there were problems there, which means it was Kyle Rudolph back then in the block quite a bit. Or was it Kyle? Wasn't it? Or like Herb Smith? Or like, it was a little, no, it wasn't Johnny Munt. Whoever that was at tight end at the time was in the block a lot. And therefore, you kind of lost your grasp on, oh my God, it was Conklin? Was that the Chris Herndon year? Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm squad showing. But like with that guy in the block a lot, you're just not going to get a lot of production out of your tight end, and you lose that kind of mismatch thing a tight end always has, where he's too big for a safety, but he's too fast for a linebacker. You like lose all that. And it's a bummer because Hawkinson's been unbelievably good at getting separation this year. It has kind of fallen away in the last couple games. Because I think he did have a rough time against Pittsburgh, but like I thought in all of those games, like he was open a lot and did a good job, especially in choice of like making that separation, and you just kind of lose that. Now, well, blocking. But at least you can keep Carson Wentz upright and try to make an offense out of that. It's just a little bit too easy for teams to let you keep 6 or 7 in protection, not blitz at all. For the Browns, still have a pretty good threat, and then cover 7 men versus 3 routes. You should be able to get everything. That's really, really hard to get open. Or you have to find a way to get open quickly. This is, to be honest, this is the dilemma that the Vikings present to a lot of teams with the Brian Flores defense. I'll get into that in a sec. And it's the thing that the Browns are probably answering to. These guys are going to get pressure on us, especially if they're going to start a young QB. We'll keep an eye on that. Or a statue QB in Joe Flacco, right? Like either way. And how are we going to be able to push the ball? And I think the only teams that had a really good answer for that against the Vikings last year were the Lions and Rams. And I think the Bengals could have had a good idea about that, but obviously they fell apart for their own reasons too. Because there were some other open opportunities that Jake Browning just couldn't hit. And I think Michael Penix also failed a little bit in Atlanta. And that could have mattered if the Vikings, showed up. But the point that I'm driving at here is like, what cost are you okay with? Are you okay with, we just are going to get an offer out of TJ Hawkinson? You're not going to have him on third downs to convert that. You're not going to have him on choice. You're maybe not even going to have him in the red zone. You just kind of have to go through everybody else. That appears to be the way things have gone, because Hawkinson has been blocking a lot this year, and that's why his production hasn't been nearly as good. And that's just like part of it. But if he's going to chip, I do want him to be a little bit less committal to the chip and still like, you still got to get out into your route, buddy. Or you shorten everything. If you don't want to do that, and you want to know, we need all our weapons, we've got to be able to like get that ball out to somebody. You shorten it for everybody. So Kevin O'Connell went empty in this game against the Steelers a lot. 5 stretched across. This is why the running back was involved in the passing game so much, because they came out in a normal personnel, usually 11 personnel, or maybe even 12, and then they would spread it out in empty to essentially force linebackers to be like sound cover guys. And there's some young linebackers over there in Pittsburgh they were trying to attack with that. I totally get it. And in a broader sense, I'm a lot less angry at Kevin O'Connell than I was after the game, after like kind of slowing down and watching everything. I could at least understand what he was going for most of the time. I still think there's a little bit too much aggression in shot plays for a quarterback that you just need to encourage him to get the ball out. I really think that what Pittsburgh did against the Vikings, which is just like quick shots, stick, slant, really simple stuff, get the ball out, let playmakers go. There is something to be learned from that on our offensive side of the ball. But I will say the adjustments that I have been asking for did happen, and it still sucked. So like, what do I know, right? But also like, it's not, I don't think that Kevin O'Connell like deeply failed to put his players in a position to succeed. Outside of, he had to throw in, all of the backup linemen, and those guys all suck. But it's like, what are you going to do about that? They didn't truncate like the ADOT or the time necessarily. They still tried to manipulate the Steelers with a lot of pump fakes and tosses. But I think A, a lot of that was Carson Wentz, and B, a lot of stuff being too slow was also on Carson Wentz, just not coming off of the read when he's supposed to. Really, the Vikings' biggest offensive problem right now is time. They need to find a way to preserve time, and if they can't preserve time, they need to find a way to get everything done in the time they have. They need to quicken stuff up, or they need to buy more time. This is the dichotomy. Do you quicken stuff up, bring down the ADOT, become a little bit boring as an offense, but hopefully you can get the ball out? Or do you try to buy time by spending your pass catchers? What is the plan to do that? It can't be neither. It can be neither if you've got a good player. And last year, the Vikings had an O-line that they trusted enough in pass pro, even with, Cam Robinson and Ed Ingram and the struggles that those guys had. Well, they were very often in 5-man protection so that the Vikings could get all 5 eligibles out and run, these super corked up pass concepts that Kevin O'Connell loves to design. Those designs will be good if you can get them out there, but maybe it's time to take a pill and say, okay, we can't do that. We got to just survive. Hopefully we get a little healthier over the bye from some of these injuries. Hopefully we get Jackson back. Hopefully we can get Brian O'Neill back, who's got an MCL. He's going to be out 2 to, 8 weeks. Like MCL sprains can be anything. And we'll talk about the injury report as well as some of the defensive stuff coming up next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you've been watching the FanDuel betting lines this week for this Vikings-Browns game, they've kind of oscillated as it became sort of clear that Carson Wentz was going to start again, and then it went to Vikings favored by 3.5. They were favored by 4.5 last week, and now they're favored by 3.5. And then it starts to come out that maybe Joe Flacco won't play, and now they're favored by 4.5 again. So depending on what you're trying to bet, monitoring, checking back with FanDuel all the time might be something that gives you just that extra little bit of juice you need to pull the trigger. FanDuel is a great place to get started with all of the fun NFL action. If you don't care about something like Jets-Dolphins or whatever's happening on Thursday Night Football this week, you can go to FanDuel and give yourself something to care about. It makes watching football even more exciting when you got a little something riding on the action. And right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So find something you're super, super confident in, even if it's like a really favored team or some very, very conservative prop bet. Put $5 on it. If you win, you get $300. It's 60-1 odds, by the way. Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Monarch Money is a great place to get yourself organized so that you can reach your wealth goals. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth. When you start adding up 401ks, properties, investments, a lot of people just get totally lost in that and don't really think a lot about what they have. And if you don't have the full picture, you might not be able to make the best decisions. So Monarch does all of that heavy lifting and organizing for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money. If you have a bunch of subscriptions that you forgot about that maybe you meant to cancel months ago, but you've just been paying and you haven't even realized it, Monarch Money can figure that out, or just like highlight your spending habits if you're looking for places where maybe you want to cut back. Plus, you can look at how well your investments are growing, if you're satisfied, if you're on track for your goals, if you need to do something more aggressive. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year. That's 50% off of your first year at Monarch Money with code LOCKEDONNFL. Moving along with the Locked On Vikings podcast, a real quick injury update from Kevin O'Connell. So JJ McCarthy is hoping to start practicing this week, but it doesn't sound like that means he's going to play. It just means they're going to kind of just start the ramp up, and then he'll have the whole bye, and the hope is that he'll be back, barring setbacks with for the Philadelphia game. So it appears we're going to get Wentz again. I would guess that we're going to get Wentz again, barring some kind of miracle. Brian O'Neill, he did suffer an MCL sprain. They were very grateful that it wasn't something worse. He did get some contact, got hurt on an extra point. That kind of thing, when you get rolled up in that way, enough to hurt your knee, that can be so much worse. We're a little bit lucky there. Elsewhere in injury news, they're hoping that they can get Andrew Van Ginkel back, but that doesn't sound super optimistic with his neck injury, so it's going to be another Dallas Turner game. And they're also looking at some of the other concussion protocols and stuff. I am recording this before the first injury report comes out. We'll probably talk about it a little bit with Spencer when we do the crossover, and he of course knows what's going on with that quarterback situation. But the big news obviously is that I would say, non-zero, but not very good chance to see JJ McCarthy this week. They're looking at the Philly game for him. Let's look at this defense though. The Vikings defense, so it's kind of funny because yesterday on the Town Hall Tuesday, I got a whole bunch of questions about, should we get rid of Flores? Should we not be maybe that happy with Marcus Dixon? Should we not be that happy with Durante Jones and this whole staff? Are these guys doing poorly? Aren't these guys supposed to have a lot of talent? And then you look, and the Vikings lead the league in defensive EPA per play allowed. that is a pretty strong case that the Vikings have the most efficient defense in the league. If you look a little deeper, you will see some issues with that. You'll see the Vikings have, a lot of turnovers that won't necessarily sustain. The Vikings defense is playing at an unbelievably well rate, but in a 2016 way where you can kind of expect that things will even out a little bit, and you want a little bit more down to down. And if you look at some of that, you will start to see a lot of the same mistakes happening again. Ivan Pace misfit, or Ivan Pace, shoots the gap, but the defensive tackle didn't hold his spot, so there's too much space. And even though he got in the backfield, he can't make the tackle. You'll see that happen a lot. Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave getting pushed around again. It was very similar to the Atlanta game, and Kenneth Gainwell can rack up over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, if I recall. And they moved the ball really easily. But what really... This was such a proof of concept game for the Vikings defense, and in not the positive way. This was a blueprint game. The problem is it's not going to be the easiest thing to replicate. So I don't think this is the Flores got solved, but boy, you saw one way to do it. If you have an offense that can execute its staples over and over and over again quickly, that's the important part. Again, the enemy is time when you're on offense. Quickly, you can pretty much have all of it. That was what happened to the Steelers to me. They wanted to run stick. You can run stick. You want to throw 4 yards underneath to your tight end and make the Vikings tackle? We will take that. Flores has even been asked about this on the podium. He says, "Yeah, I'm not mad about a completion if you get 6 yards in a completion, because you have to do that successfully 11 more times in a row without screwing up, and most offenses can't pull that off." Well, the Steelers could. And hey, your quarterback's 41 years old and the Hall of Famer. Yes, he can do that. That is not something you're going to see a ton this year. I don't even think, the Eagles are a pretty gosh darn consistent team, but the Ravens have enough bozo in them where I do think that some of the stuff will work there. The Chargers have enough bozo in them, right? There are... and those are just some of the next teams. Anytime you're getting a reasonably young quarterback, or a guy like Joe Flacco who doesn't quite have the efficiency to Tom Brady his way down the field 5 yards at a time, eventually you get behind the sticks, and when you get behind the sticks, you have to start forcing things, and that's where the teeth of the Vikings defense comes and gets you. But it was really interesting to see the Steelers methodically 4 yards at a time go down the field a couple of different times. Atlanta did it too via the run game, and the run game was a big part of this game against the Steelers as well. But to watch Aaron Rodgers just dink, dunk, I think the league low depth of target all year, it was like 2.2. It's a ridiculously low depth of target. A usual depth of target is like 7. The Steelers were 2. So you made the Steelers do everything they needed to do after the catch, which, of course, DK Metcalf houses a slant. You're pretty happy with that. That was another instance of, I think that one was on, I think it was Pace. He was supposed to be in a hook zone. He went to the flat for some reason, so you had 2 defenders in the flat, nobody in the hook. The hook was wide open, and Theo Jackson didn't nail down on it quickly enough. He misses the tackle and then off to the races. Those are the kinds of mistakes that the Flores defense cannot handle. You can give up the completion with a mistake. You cannot give up stuff after the catch because people are in such precise spots that they're not always going to have the angle. And then suddenly a decent play for the offense can turn into an explosive with one missed tackle. You simply have to tackle and you have to get that angle and you have to be a good safety about it. I think that was a big we miss Cam Bynum moment. Bynum made that mistake a couple times too, but to see Theo Jackson make that particular mistake was a little disappointing. Hopefully we get a little more Harrison Smith this week. He's still kind of in and out of the lineup. But point being, the Steelers proved that if you can run slant, stick, and screen 12 times in a row, you can probably score. I don't know how many other teams in the league can do that. I don't know how many teams in this division can do that consistently without screwing it up once. I look at the Packers, who I know things are dark in Green Bay, but I still think most people see them as a pretty good team. But that's not the way that they do that. They don't, patiently and methodically kind of walk their way down the field. They're hunting explosives a lot, and they're doing a lot of other fancier stuff and trying to overcome mistakes. They're trying to overcome like long downs and distances and stuff, and can a lot of the time with like the explosiveness that they can generate. That doesn't work against this defense. That's not the way, or at least that's not what the Steelers proved is possible. What the Steelers proved is possible is that if you can be pristine, you can do it. And you can move the ball down the field way more uncontested than you can against any other defense. I mean, look, you run 12 perfect plays in a row, you're probably scoring a touchdown against anybody. But the point I'm trying to make is with the Vikings, it's a very uncontested. It suddenly doesn't matter who can break a tackle, who can do anything. If you just want to run, stick, and execute it, you might as well be running on air. The Vikings have ceded that. They've decided we are okay with that because enough of these offenses are going to make mistakes and we're going to be able to pounce and be opportunistic when it works. And to their credit, that has given them opportunities to get pick sixes or scoop in scores, punch the ball out, jump routes and get interceptions, get pressures, sacks, force errant throws. They've been really good at creating that chaos. And it is in part because they're not worried too much if you make a 4-yard completion and we have to come up and tackle, because they trust that they're going to be able to limit that. So then they can play a whole bunch of other stuff super aggressive and create that chaos. It's a cost benefit. They are paying 4-yard completions for the benefit of a bunch of turnovers, and it has created the best EPA per play in the league so far. So it's pretty hard to argue. But yeah, the blueprint is out. If you can be really consistent at your staple quick game, you can get the ball out quickly. You can get uncontested completions basically all day long. If you can pair that with the run game, you can move the ball in the defense. We'll see what other teams on the schedule are capable of that consistently. Tomorrow, we've got the crossover with Spencer, so we'll get into that. And then, of course, on Friday, we've got the Zoever under and all that other cool stuff. I'll see you all for that. And as always, Skull.